The Pacific Ocean is massive, and I'm sure you know that from looking at any map. It alone takes up a massive 30% of the Earth's surface. Of course, with being so big, this ocean influences so many of the Earth's weather factors in almost every continent. The Pacific is so powerful as well that with its effects on the weather that it has, it's actually aiding in cooling down the Earth, or at least slowing the effects of climate change. That's something I could possibly discuss in another video, but that's a huge topic that I don't have time for right now. Basically, without this ocean being as big as it is, many of the climates of where we live today would be drastically different. So what if we slapped a massive continent in the middle of it? The land of Mu was first theorized in the 19th century by a man named Augustus Le Pigeon, claiming that many of the world's cultures came from one culture and were refugees from a land he believed to have sunk in the Atlantic. Sound familiar? Well, he called this lost continent Mu. This never went over well, as many people disputed these claims even back then. The idea of Mu wasn't really popularized until a gentleman by the name of James Churchward wrote about it in the early 1900s with a series of books. He also relocated it from here to here, smack dab in the center of the Pacific. This land stretched from Hawaii in the north as far south as the Cook Islands, and all the way from Easter Island in the east to the Marianas. This land is massive, and with this new land comes a whole new chain of weather events and disruptions to the currents of the Pacific. It's almost as big as South America, and by almost I mean it's actually bigger. One thing you have to remember that has to happen for this to exist is tectonic plates. Now obviously the Pacific plate, which this land would lie on, is actually one massive chunk. It is the largest plate on the planet, and it contains almost all the Pacific Ocean on top of it. No land this size could form on a plate without some sort of force, like a giant landmass is slamming into each other, like the Indian subcontinent which slams into the Asian plate, and that's how we got the Himalayas. So in this timeline, to make this possible, I've broken the Pacific plate in half. After a very long time of slamming into each other, the two plates create a mountain range running from the southwest to the northeast. We'll call these the Muon Alps. This range will create the spine of the island. Now you may ask, why would I go and adjust the tectonic plates to meet these demands? Other than being a little more realistic, this is just ridiculous. Tectonic plates have a major role in how the ocean currents flow, heat, and cool. This will have a major impact on the weather systems in this new Earth. The first thing we're going to notice is that almost all of the Pacific currents will now shift and flow in a new pattern. Not just because of the plates, but also because of the wind and the fact that there's a massive amount of land in the way now. So having this new landmass won't change the winds too much. Mostly they will affect, though, the flow of tropical storms and cyclones, especially in certain regions where there's mountains and not. I think the first area we should tackle before really seeing how where you live will be impacted by this is how does this change our current ocean currents? Ha! It's safe to say that the equatorial currents are gone, and that creates the first problem, which is the disappearance of the El Nino Southern Oscillation pattern, otherwise known as El Nino or La Nina. Some of you may have heard of this, but for those of you who haven't, basically El Nino is the warming of the equatorial waters, and La Nina is the cooling of the equatorial waters. These happen on and off throughout the years. El Nino and La Nina impact North and South America, Asia, Australia, Africa, and even Antarctica is affected with these weather changes alone. Often El Nino will create drier conditions in many of these regions and delay rains, as it will draw moisture away from those places. Of course, it can vary per region. Like in Eastern Africa, it actually increases rainfall, as well as parts of North and South America, like in the southern US and parts of Brazil. El Nino will also dry out some of the northern US states and the South Pacific as well, and also Antarctica. La Nina is the cooling of the waters, which I had said earlier. This will often create the opposite effect of El Nino. Of course, there are many variables to this, and some regions will be affected by local weather patterns, jet streams, and a lot of other factors come into play. But as you can see, not having this equatorial current will drastically change a lot of the world's major weather patterns. And I haven't even touched how the currents are changed yet, or the fact that this whole new landmass has also displaced a lot of water, causing sea levels to rise. How high? Well, I'm not a mathematician, so here's a drawing to show you. So, How will our new ocean currents look? Well, it goes from this to this. Now, as I usually state, I am not a weather expert, and by extension, I am not an oceanographer either. But, with our new currents drawn out, what does this exactly mean? Well, it means that there will be some major changes to South America and likely Australia. This continent may raise temperatures across the globe, and by May, it actually does. And so it really affects everyone. Between South America and Mu, though, you may notice a lot of warm currents flowing in the area. This would likely create frequent areas of low pressure along the eastern shore of Mu and western shores of South America. This region I imagine to be very humid, very tropical, and very hot, especially with the warm currents flowing into this region. And of course, with the equator right there, it's just a hot, humid place to live. Frequent rainstorms and possibly nice, pretty coral reefs could thrive here, as it does in Australia and the Caribbean. Speaking of Australia, the only thing that may happen is that the eastern shores may turn a little greener and more humid, a lot more tropical in eastern Australia. Not much really changed to the western half of the country though, or at least it shouldn't. Somewhere that will actually be interesting though, I believe, is the heart of Mu. What goes on here? Well, I actually predict a desert would flourish in the heartland of Mu, perhaps more in the northern heartland, but I say this because with less water from the Pacific acting as our temperature regulator, Mu's heart might be a dry savanna or wasteland, especially since it runs right across the equator. And since the eastern shores of Mu and the western and southwestern shores of Mu will likely have low pressure systems due to the heat and moisture in those areas, this would likely be a very dry area, and that could really impact the northern US as well, changing our weather systems in a whole different direction. Of course though, just because I say it will be frequented by high pressure systems doesn't mean it always will be. There's still seasons, there's still the jet stream, there's still winds, and all kinds of factors that go into that. I do feel though that there would be a significant lack of rainfall for sure in that part of the region. Along the northwestern regions of Mu, we could see those deserts begin to green a little into some subtropic regions, and as you head further west, the land would continue to green into a tropical landscape. The tropical landscape would likely stretch from the very northwestern tip all the way down to the southwestern tip. Maybe a little bit along the southern coast over there, and of course along a little bit of the northern coast, but not too much. One region of Mu I would find very interesting is the southeast. The reason is that it's very possible this region could develop into a Mediterranean or even temperate type climate. With a cold southern current moving into the area, it could become a lot like California and Chile are today, both with Mediterranean and marine climates. Of course though, there's still the fact that everything would likely be a little warmer than we are today, so I could just be completely wrong. I'm just saying that if these weather temperatures stay the same as they are here, it could do that. Something else that this land would impact is hurricanes and cyclones. With common paths and how they form, likely Mu would be subject to the brunt of a lot of these storms along the eastern and southwestern shores. Plus a lot of the world currents having shifted, they could be flowing in new directions as well. So before this video gets too long, in conclusion, having a massive swath of land in the middle of the Pacific is not really an amazing thing. Higher sea levels, the planet would be a few more degrees Celsius, and even then, Mu would suffer from some catastrophic storms. A lot of hurricanes frequent the area, and I didn't even cover the earthquakes and volcanoes throughout there because of those two land masses slamming into each other. There's likely to be a lot of volcanoes on the western shores of Mu, there's a lot of earthquakes in the area because of the two land masses hitting, and it just goes on. Likely where you live today would be a little warmer, you might have some oceanfront property if you live a little inland, but nothing wrong with that really, is there? Of course, this is all just a theory though, and this is just me having some fun imagining how a world like this would function. I think it's still incredible though that weather will change and adapt to new environments as it always has throughout Earth's life. There is far too much about this new land to cover in one video. Maybe you all want an expansion at some point or another. Well, go ahead and leave some feedback down below in the comments and share your thoughts. What do you think this new world would be like?